Hello. This will act as a new series that I am trying out. We're going to call this Story Time with DJ. And this is going to be a series where I regale stories of my life. For all intents and purposes, these stories are factual and true, though through my trade I may embellish ever so slightly for the sake of entertainment. It has been requested that I start this series, and I don't know how well this is going to go. So, this may be a one-off. It may be a series. I'm not entirely sure. But, that being said, let's get into it. I'm going to try and fit in 3 stories today. We'll just see how that goes. I don't want to be too ambitious. Phone battery is quite low, and the time is very late. So, I'm going to start with the fish story. A lot of the times, when people tell a fish story, it is a very tall tale, bragging or boasting about the size or mystique or exotic nature of a large fish that they had captured. This is similar. However, this is not a tall tale. This is a factual and unfortunately true story. When I was younger, I'm not exactly sure how young, I do not recall, I was with my family at my grandparents' cabin/home in Ore Grande, Idaho. My grandmother and my grandfather had a creek, or crick if you are of a lower brow, behind their homestead, and it was a creek that the salmon would run through during their spawning season. Now, it just so happened that we had seen the salmon running through this creek, and I had set it upon myself, motivated by nothing more than pure childlike motivation, to capture one of these fish. I don't know why I thought I could, as my angling skills of the past had amounted to pretty much 1 trout. I had caught 1 rainbow trout prior to this event. I saw a particularly large specimen in the middle of this creek. The depth of this creek was probably about 4.5 feet. I swung my basically Fisher-Price fishing pole time after time after time, casting out, getting closer and closer and closer to this particular salmon. Each time I cast my line, I thought for sure this salmon was going to flee. Each time, I was wrong. That salmon stood its ground and remained perfectly still. After growing very frustrated with watching this event transpire, my father commented, "Boy, you'd be better off hiking out there in the middle of that creek and picking that damn fish up with your bare hands than you would to keep throwing that damn line out there." Fair enough. I put down my pole and I began wading out into the middle of this creek. I took my father's advice at face value without the slightest idea that he was being completely sarcastic. About halfway, I started to look back, realizing that I had never waded into a creek before, and I could feel the current, and it was intimidating for a small lad such as myself. And my father was too dumbstruck to really give any kind of advice or coaching on the matter, so I simply continued wading towards that salmon that would not bite my bait. As I approached it, I was again sure that this salmon would flee. I thought there was no way in hell this was going to work. However, as I approached the salmon, no further away than I am to you right now, it became clear that this salmon was not going to move. I figured there was a chance it was dead, but I'd still never caught a fish this large, dead or alive. So I was still set on picking it up and taking it back to shore. And I took my arms and I scooped the salmon up and held it close to my chest, as a soldier would a rifle if they were marching. The salmon struggled a little bit, if only to let me know that it was still alive and still strong. And I began wading back towards the shore, keeping the salmon submerged so as not to allow it to die, as I was not a monster, or did not see myself as such. And as I was wading back towards the shore, my mother and father had gathered together, completely in awe and utterly dumbstruck at what was transpiring before them. I got to the shore, brimming with absolute pride and joy at my accomplishment. I had barehanded caught a maybe 3.5 foot long salmon. I was extremely proud of myself. This moment did not last long. To my horror, I learned 2 things this day. The first is that fish are capable of making noise. And I don't mean splashing. I mean vocalization. As this salmon made out a very guttural or something to that effect. As he did this, I learned the hard way that this particular salmon was a male, and it ejaculated its treasured load all down the front side of my muscle shirt, an and one gray heather basketball shirt. I would never wear that muscle shirt again, and in my horror at this event, I dropped the salmon, and it hit its head on a small boulder and began bleeding out as it floated unconscious downstream, very likely dead on impact. I was not aware of what had happened until much later, because I had not had sex education at that point. And though it may seem like a perfect opportunity to fill in on the missing information I had at that point, a teachable, educational moment, instead my parents decided to laugh hysterically. Can't say I blame them. I'm fairly certain any normal person would. So that's the fish story. I'm going to check my battery real quick. I have plenty of time. Second story I'm going to tell is... what was it, actually? I should probably try and remember that. Ah, yes. The second story is a story of my second grade year of primary school, or grade school, depending on your region or locale. I will note, before I begin this story, most of this story is told to me secondhand. I cannot recall nor trust whatever I can recall of this story of my own accord, as I am fairly certain I was either not sentient or not conscious for the bulk of this story. I shouldn't say sentient, I mean sane. I was not sane. Then again, are any of us ever? That's neither here nor there. Getting to the meat of the story. When I was in second grade, I was somewhat of an outcast. I suppose giving a time and date on that is probably not necessary, as it has been a constant throughout my entire life. Go figure. Needless to say, I was not liked, whether it be by the students or by the teachers. My family was somewhat poor. Or at the very least, I could not afford nice things. And if I could, it came at a much greater cost than I was ever aware of. Very, very large amounts of credit card debt that a mother tactfully hid. On this day, I had decided to tap my wooden ruler against the back of a fellow classmate's head. I will not name the name of this classmate, as I don't want to dox anyone. But suffice to say, this classmate was a favorite of the teachers. And she did not take kindly once she had realized what was occurring. So, in a fit of rage and authoritarian power hunger, she took the wooden ruler from my hand and broke it over her knee. This is the last moment where I can recall anything on my end. In what I was told is some sort of fit of rage, I quickly scrambled up my chair onto my desk and then launched myself onto her throat, biting like some sort of feral savage animal. I was then thrown off and allegedly ran outside, where I would be pursued by this teacher, who was not happy to have been assaulted by a second grader, and being of the more right-wing Republican conservative type, thought that the only real solution to this was probably to beat my ass. I can't say exactly what her motives were because she never got to see them through. In my feral rampage, I tripped her and had her fall face first onto the basketball court that was right outside of the classroom. It was then that I mounted the back of her head and began feverishly slamming her face into the asphalt, or the blacktop, or the basketball place where children played basketball. The people that witnessed this, or the children that witnessed this, claim it went on for quite some time before the physical education teacher was able to see what was going on and rip me off of my second grade teacher. I would never have the opportunity to ask her any questions, to see the result of my rampage, or to really have a proper explanation for what had happened. Because after that day, I was in in-school suspension for a period of several weeks until the semester ended, wherein I was then transferred to a completely different school. Luckily, I was only there for a year or so, just the third grade period, before I was able to return to my original elementary school. Again, I must stress, this is all secondhand. I was not conscious, as it were, for that event. I do not recall it from my perspective. I have regurgitated this story many, many times, but it is always with an uncertainty. The final story is of a similar nature, taking place at the same elementary school, this time fast-forwarding to about 5th grade. Very likely around the same time period as the fish story. By this point, I had endured several years of bullying and teasing from many of my classmates. One in particular was a fairly attractive young woman that I had a considerable crush on. However, that did not stop me from being angered by her constant teasing, of which she chose to mock my height. At that time, she was taller than me. She was a female and had matured faster than me, and had grown to be maybe a good half-foot, little more, higher than me. Taller than me, sorry. It had become fairly regular for me to chase her around the playground, attempting to exact my revenge. And this had become so normal that I really didn't know exactly what I was going to do if I ever caught her, because this happened so frequently. Every day, the bell would ring for recess. I would try to set up some sort of ambush, or get ahead of her, or try to trick her in some way so that I could catch her and make her pay for her words of torment. But she was always quicker than me. A longer stride, more athletic build. She had no trouble escaping me. That is, until one day, where a very, very wholesome young man in our same grade and age group mistook what was going on as a friendly game. Perhaps tag, perhaps some other sort of game where someone would be chasing someone. It doesn't matter. What matters is, as she passed him, he cheerfully decided to grab her and restrain her so that I could, presumably, tag her and force her to chase me. He could not have possibly been prepared for what came next. I had watched a great deal of professional wrestling, and I was very fond of some of the signature moves of the various actors. One of which I was extremely fond of, and that was Kane's chokeslam. Now you might say Undertaker also uses a chokeslam, and Big Show does as well, among probably countless other wrestlers by now. But at the time, the main one I had watched had been Kane. Undertaker was not very active, and Big Show, well, his wasn't as cool, I suppose. As you might have guessed at what was coming next, I grabbed the entire throat of this young woman and raised her above my head with a very, very adrenaline-infused rage. And then, in a moment that horrified her, the boy who had restrained her, and frankly, even myself, I chokeslammed her as hard as I could, and I knocked the breath clean out of her airways. She was gasping and struggling to breathe, and clutching at her throat, as I am sure it was still in pain. These stories don't really have good, clean endings that give any kind of, I don't know, end? Because that was it. I chokeslammed her. I was not punished. I was not reprimanded. I was feared. That's it. That's all there was. Anywho, that's it. Those are my stories for today. I might continue this, but I'm also not exactly big on being psychoanalyzed by would-be psychiatrists or therapists, so this might be a very exclusive one-off kind of thing. So I hope you've enjoyed, and if you look forward to more or you'd like more, leave a comment. Thank you. Have a good day.